Good morning. Yay. You guys woke up. That's good to hear. I'm glad to be here to talk, I'm glad to be here and not talking about African swine fever. That's taken pretty much my entire life for the last several weeks, months, yeah. So alternative proteins, very controversial topic probably for most of you in this room. I've been looking at it for a while. Rabobank is involved in a number of different aspects of alternative proteins. We do work with a lot of companies already involved in alternative proteins from a developmental standpoint. We have an incubator at the bank that lets us kind of peer into that world a bit. But at the same time, we work with a lot of traditional packaged meats companies, processed meat processors, and CPG, big food companies that are all looking at investing in this area. It is hot. It's not going away. What the trajectory looks like is still up for debate, but there is a lot going on here, and we only have to look at last week and what happened with Beyond Meat to say a lot of investor interest, a lot of dollars flowing into this category, record-breaking IPO of Beyond Meat. Who would have thought? But the question that you should be asking is, why is this so hot? Why is it that this time around, I mean, these are not new products. Alternative proteins have been around for a long time. What has changed? What are consumers looking for that makes this so much more successful than any time in the past? Is it the fact that they're better tasting? Yeah, I would agree that these are much better tasting than, what we would have seen as kind of that hockey puck in the freezer. No negatives there, but it wasn't a great look for alternative proteins. I think that Beyond and Impossible have both done a fantastic job, not just in product development. You may not like them, but there is a group of consumers that do, and they are marketing machines. They have got those products in every nook and cranny in America. So is it that the products are better, or is it marketing? They are fantastic. They have got 80+% store penetration at this point. They've got an Impossible Whopper now at Burger King, and that's rolling out nationwide. So they have, for sure, put themselves in the mainstream, and that is a big part of it. But the other question is it that the consumer has structurally changed? I'm not clear on that yet. I think it's new and exciting. There isn't a lot of growth at grocery today. You listen to any earnings call from any large cap food company, and I can tell you that there is nothing really growing at grocery. Alternative proteins, that's hot. That's exciting. It appeals to this generation that nobody can really tap into. So from that perspective, I think it checks a lot of boxes. But there's no guarantees that with a fairly limited selection of products, and mind you, there are a very limited selection of products at this point, that consumers are going to keep coming back to this category over and over again. So the bottom line here, I think most of you are familiar with plant-based proteins. I need to kind of do a little refresher here. Plant-based proteins, for those of you that don't know, are the Beyond Meat and Impossible. They're not meat products, to be clear, but they want to be meat. They are targeting meat. If you look at the official definition from the industry group, they have clearly stated that you've got a bullseye on your back. So it is quite feasible that as this category develops, it's going to be an even bigger issue for all of you. Now, I think most of you are familiar with those two companies, Beyond Meat and Impossible, but look, in the last year alone, there's been over 20 new companies that have introduced new products or are in the process of developing new products for the market. This isn't a short list, and I'd say pretty much every month we add somebody new to this list. So it's not as though it's going to be just Beyond and Impossible in the long run. This is going to be a very eclectic, fun group of plant-based proteins that are all going to be targeting your business. And it's not just ground beef. It's going to be in random places that you haven't even thought of yet. Now, you look at that list, and then you look at the companies that are involved here. We all know about Tyson and Cargill's investments in the plant and lab-based meat areas, but if you look, some of these names like Kellogg, cereal company, they also own Morningstar, and that's a traditional kind of giant, I guess, as it were, mini giant, in the alternative protein space. But a lot of companies, a lot of new multinational companies, Unilever, Nestle, all targeting plant-based proteins for growth. Because again, there isn't a lot of growth at packaged food. I think what you have to also look at is the difference between plant-based, which we know, and lab-based, which hasn't come yet. There's been a lot of debate about lab-based meat because we don't know a lot yet. These are not products that have hit the market. They're not commercial yet. They're grown in a lab. The issue is that they've had a great success coming up with proof of concept, but they haven't been able to scale up just yet. So these are not products that are probably going to come to market by the end of the year, though some of these companies continue to say they'll be here by December. They said that last year and the year before. But I think that you also have to look at what they're targeting. These companies consider themselves meat. They have it clearly defined that they are actually going to be considered meat. Now, there's obviously a lot of debate around that, and I credit the industry for taking hold of that issue early on and making great strides there. These are the companies that are involved, and I can tell you there are billions of dollars funneling into this category by some really big hitters. Pretty much all of Silicon Valley has put their entire life savings into lab-based meat, which is telling in and of itself. I don't know if these are going to be successful. Their claims are different than plant-based meat, and I would argue that it is targeting your consumer directly. Their claims are often to feed the world, that we're not going to be able to produce enough animal-based meat to feed the world. That's a popular one. But if you look, longer term, is that really the key constraint for the industry? We've always had technology that boosts our ability to feed the world, and is this just another answer or a way to make some quick dollars? I mentioned regulation because I think of all the issues on the table with alternative proteins, regulation is going to be key. What is meat? I don't think anyone confuses plant-based meat today with meat, though there's a lot of debate around that too. And we only have to look at the dairy industry and see what happened to that market to know that that is a threat. About 10% of the dairy industry now is made up of plant-based milks, and it continues to grow. We're looking at meat, alternative proteins really making up a very small, less than 1% of the overall meat industry, but who's to say that in time with all of these new products it won't take up a larger share? Lab-based meat has a number of challenges, not just regulatory, but you have to think about that whole consumer acceptance factor. No one's tasted them that I know. There are people that have tasted them. But the issue, they really got to get kind of past the ick factor, right? They're growing lean. They have to put in fat. How is that going to look? The logical market for them is going to be grinds, sausage products, nuggets, things that aren't easily, that are easier to copy, let's just say. But whether or not they're going to taste like traditional protein is still up for debate. I think, as I mentioned, regulatory challenges are going to be a big hurdle, but cost is the other. And right now, I can tell you they're not there yet. I mentioned that some are looking at end of the year launches. I think that's highly unlikely. The big issue that I have, or the big challenge as I see it, is that we have a growing issue, as I mentioned, in Asia, little issue in China. If China was looking to feed its population, why wouldn't they look to alternative proteins, and specifically lab-based meat, as a likely alternative? It's going to be easier for them to grow that, in theory, than it is going to be to recover from African swine fever. So I'll just put that out there. I think that we talked a little bit, and I'll wrap up here in a minute because I know we're short on time, but We talked a little bit about the rationale. What's driving these consumers to eat plant-based proteins? It's different, as I mentioned. Some of it's health, some of it's social and environmental. It's all the activist reasons that we've been talking about for years. And I would tell you that a bigger and bigger segment of that is people that are trying to reduce meat consumption. It used to be that we talked about vegans and vegetarians as the likely consumer. That's no longer the case. It's that 30% of the American public, roughly, that are looking to reduce their overall meat consumption. And that, I think, is the risk to this industry, that people actually just eat meat one less day a week. That's one less, sales point and one less dollar in your pocket. It's not to say that it's wrong, but that's exactly where they're targeting. It's that percentage of the population that want to eat less meat. There's a number of reasons, as I talked about, environmental, and we could talk all day about the back and forth with these guys on those specific issues. I would only say that there's a great role for the industry to play in clearing up a lot of that debate. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation because this industry is very vocal. It's small but mighty, I would say. They have a lot of people with a very loud voice, and they like to talk about the benefits of their product and disparage yours. So that's going to be an ongoing battle for the industry, as I see it. Certainly something that fits neatly into their little bucket. So we're almost at $1 billion in sales today, slightly shy of that, but I'd suspect by next year we're well over that. It's growing pretty quickly, as I mentioned, because of the distribution at retail and now into food service. There are limitations right now. You guys might have seen some of these supply constraints. They haven't been able to find enough ingredients. It's very sad. For their product, and I think that's a real risk for them. They haven't really thought through the supply chain there in terms of building inventory. That's going to be a constraint in the short run, surely, but I would think that they move past that pretty quickly, especially if you think producing pea protein is going to be a little bit better return than it would be growing corn or beans in the next couple of years. So that's kind of a high-level kind of overview of plant proteins and lab-based. I can go into a lot more detail in the Q&A. I would only say that as an industry, it's your job to stay on top of this. Don't think it's not going to be a challenge for the industry. Read, to the point. There's a lot of information. These guys are very prolific. You won't agree with any of it. It'll make your blood boil, but you need to read it and be aware of kind of what their thought process is, what their approach is. There's a reason Tyson and Cargill invested in these businesses. It's not only because they see the logical growth in the industry, but it's because they had a seat at the table. They understood that by having a view as to the growth trajectory of the industry, that they were better prepared for its ultimate challenge, as it were. Now, Tyson, for its part, is launching its own plant-based product here later this summer, so they probably went a little over and above. But, it is, the consumer is always right. There is a percentage of the population that will eat this. The question is how much. I would say that looking at our outlook as we see it today with the inflation that we're expecting with some of the shortages in protein, as we send more product abroad, we're going to have very high-cost meat, and that's going to give a window for this industry to develop. So definitely make sure that you're prepared for that. Obviously I don't need to tell anyone in this room, there's only so much you can do if you're a producer, but, we really need to stay competitive in that meat case. We talked about it a little bit yesterday. You go into that sea of packages, and how do you really differentiate? We need to think about how we as an industry put our product out there and remain competitive and attractive for the consumer, providing them with the story in some cases. And don't give up the lead on health and sustainability. The package on some of these processed meats is 20 ingredients long. These are highly processed products. They're not natural. You look at your product, what's the ingredient list? You've got the edge. Use it. I think that if you look at the fat content and the nutritional content on some of these plant-based products, it's not what you might think. It's not healthier. And I think the industry has a good story there. So don't give up the lead on health. So, I think that you've got a good natural product that people want, and I think I'll stop there. I'll answer some questions, I think, after our next speaker. Thank you.